Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Marco's Pizza. We begin today with very big news. Georgia has changed its game time against Middle Tennessee State. Exactly why is that? We'll talk to Brad Nitz, WSB TV Channel 2 meteorologist, in a couple of seconds on that subject. What does this mean for Georgia? We'll hear from former Georgia quarterback David Greene on that. We're all over the big story as the Dogs are not playing a night game anymore. It's noon on Saturday. More to come as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We broadcast this show live every morning at 10 a.m. Many of you hear it later on the day, either at noon on the radio at 960 The Ref or in podcast form sometime later than that. As we take to the air here this morning, we are reacting immediately to something that was just announced a few minutes ago. The Georgia-Middle Tennessee State game time, scheduled for a night game, 7:15 p.m., has now been changed to noon. The after effects, or the sort of predicted after effects of Hurricane Florence, the reason why. We're going to talk a lot about that on today's program here today. In just a minute, we're going to hear from WSB TV Channel 2 meteorologist Brad Nitz on exactly what the storm looks like for the state of Georgia to help us kind of explain exactly, why it is that a game in Athens, where the forecast, at least the last time that I saw it, did not really look like rain on Saturday for the Athens area, but Georgia thinking better of the situation, changing the game time. Let's find out more about that right now and welcome in a great guy, expert on the weather, terrific personality that you follow on TV for a long time on WSB TV Channel 2. It's meteorologist Brad Nitz. Brad, welcome to DawgNation Daily. We really appreciate you being a part of our program here this morning. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to being with you today.
So let me start with this. We're not weather experts here. It's a little bit confusing for many Georgia fans. The forecast this week in Athens has sort of shown, very little rain on Saturday, if none at all. High temperatures, sunny skies. What is the impact of Hurricane Florence going to be on the state of Georgia, the best that we can tell right now? And why might Georgia have made the decision that it made to change the game time on Saturday?
Yeah, so sure, I have a few thoughts on that. First off, I don't expect that we'll have any impact from Florence during the game on Saturday, or really anywhere in Georgia on Saturday. So that's going to be a concern. It's really going to be hot and dry, maybe likely to have some high clouds, especially off the top of that storm, but those aren't rain producers. So kind of hazy sunshine Saturday, and temperatures in Athens at kickoff now at noon. Going to be around 87 degrees, and then it's going to climb up to low to mid-90s during the game, so it's going to be a hot and dry one. So the thinking is, of course, we're always, when we're making these plans, there's the possibility that the track is adjusted to speed changes, so there's always some uncertainty, although now that we're getting closer, we've got pretty high confidence. But the other part of it is, there's a lot of folks that are traveling to the game. There's first responders, hosting a game in Athens takes a lot of people, and some of those people have other interests in other places they need to be. So moving it earlier, I would imagine, can help them out too. I haven't spoken to the folks that make those decisions, so that part of it's a little bit of speculation on my part, but sometimes there's the logistical considerations in addition to the weather.
In the sort of official statement that comes out from Georgia, they mention sort of an unpredictable nature to the weather here. When you look at the way that the situation with the Florence has changed over the last couple of days, and given your expertise in following storms like this for a number of years, how likely is it that by the time we get to Saturday, the weather in Athens could look different than it looks now? What degree of certainty can meteorologists such as yourself make predictions on a storm like this about?
Yeah, it's there's obviously a margin of error, and as you get farther out into time, that margin gets bigger. That's no surprise to anybody. But we're talking now, about 48 hours away, and at this point, we've got a high level of confidence in both the track and the intensity. I would say, if we look at the kind of the outer worst case scenario, is that there could be one of those outer rain bands coming through late in the day on Saturday. I expect rain from this will affect part of Athens, North Georgia, but not until Sunday and into Monday. This is just going to be a very slow-moving system. Terrible impacts along the coast of the Carolinas, flooding in North and South Carolina, but all of that should stay to our east.
Earlier this week, Georgia Governor Nathan Deal put the entire state under a state of emergency. We sort of understand why that happens from a procedural standpoint, but if you had to look over the course of the next few days, where in Georgia, maybe beyond the coast, is this expected to be the worst? Is it expected to be bad for the Georgia coast? And kind of, I guess, where else could potentially be in the path of this storm from the standpoint of the folks listening around Georgia right now?
Right, sure. So along the Georgia coast, really the main impact, really the only impact, is going to be the large swell. So already seeing that now, rip current threats up and down the east coast of the entire country, and certainly the Georgia coast. And there'll be some beach erosion right there along the front of the beach, but nothing that's going to cause any big problems. That's the coastal impact. Inland, the potential for some heavy rain, talking 2 to 4 inches of rain across eastern Georgia, the counties that border South Carolina in particular, and up into the northeast Georgia mountains. Now, you think about the wind as it blows across the ground, and as it rides up into the mountains, that added lift enhances the rain development. So it could be some of the heaviest rain in the northeast Georgia mountains. But even there, and eastern Georgia, where we get some heavier rain late Sunday into Monday, I still don't expect any problems. 2 to 4 inches of rain we can handle.
So let me finish up with this then. When you look at the up and down sort of the Atlantic, mid-Atlantic coast, South Carolina, North Carolina, it seems like the path of this storm has slightly changed a little bit. Where, up and down the coast here, which states, I guess, would you say are sort of most in the pathway to kind of really get hit pretty hard by this thing?
Yeah, right. So the hardest hit area is going to be North Carolina. It's going to be the southeast coast of North Carolina, kind of south of the Outer Banks. So if you can picture the Outer Banks and Cape Hatteras that sticks out there the farthest, south of that, down towards Wilmington, those will be the spots that'll have the storm surge. That's the rise in the ocean water, around 10 feet, really 9 to 13 feet is what we're highlighting, and then, of course, the swells on top of that. So that threat hasn't changed, and that can cause extensive damage right along the beaches. Into South Carolina, there'll certainly be some beach erosion and certainly some impacts, but to a lesser degree around Myrtle Beach, northeastern parts of coastal South Carolina. And by the time this gets inland and brings some rain to us late Sunday and Monday, the wind's going to be down around 25, 30 miles an hour. So locally in Georgia, no wind threat whatsoever.
It's Brad Nitz, WSB-TV, Channel 2, excellent meteorologist. Brad, for those of us here in the Atlanta area who want to keep track of how all this changes and develops over the next couple of days, where can we go for more from you guys there at Channel 2?
Well, of course, live on Channel 2, we have apps that you can download at the App Store, WSB-TV, weatherapps.com. We've got apps that you can download for WSB on your Apple TV, your Roku, Smart TV, all those Fire Stick, all that stuff. And you, of course, get my forecast on the Jumbotron in Sanford Stadium Saturday.
That's a really good thing to keep in mind there as well. Brad, thanks so much for your time. We'll look forward to having you here on DawgNation Daily again, hopefully for a happier subject again very soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff there, Brad Nitz, WSB-TV, Channel 2 meteorologist. So the latest here, you hear him explain the situation with the weather. Georgia thinking better of its scenario in Athens, despite the fact that right now the forecast not really calling for rain and things in Georgia not expected to be at their worst until maybe Sunday. But Georgia changes its game time from what was supposed to be a 7:15 p.m. kick to a noon kick between Georgia and Middle Tennessee State on Saturday. This will obviously impact a lot around the game coming up over the course of Saturday. We'll do our part here on the next couple days here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, to kind of make you aware of all of that. Autograph signing change time for Tailgate Apparel, for instance. We'll hear from David Greene on that subject a little bit more. I'm watching along in the Facebook comments section, and many of you are asking, what does this mean for the game on TV? We can address that here coming up in just a minute. We'll take a lot of your comments here, as this is a very complicated story. Game time changes impact dog walks and things of that nature. So let's kind of cover it all and say thanks so much for being a part of our program so far here today. This is, of course, DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Good to have you with us live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, DawgNation Twitter feed, on the radio there at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, the city in the center of all this conversation here today. And, of course, in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found, the Apple Podcast Player, Google Podcast Player there for the Android devices, the world-famous DawgNation.com, and SoundCloud, kind of everything else. We're just really, really glad to have you a part of a DawgNation Daily here today. So let me kind of get to kind of where we are on some of this and kind of figure out how kind of where we are. First of all, thanks to Marco's Pizza for being a part of this. Of course, many of you getting ready to settle in tonight, watch some football that is going to be played as scheduled, both in the college and the NFL side of things. And of course, a great way to do that is kind of settle in with a 2 medium, 2 topping pizza for $6.99 each. That's every store, every day, the Italian way there at Marcos.com. We appreciate them being a part of our program. We appreciate a chance to sit down and enjoy some authentic Italian quality pizza. Always good stuff. Good to have Marco's Pizza on the program. Of course, we will get to some regular football talk here in a moment. We'll welcome in David Greene, the former Georgia quarterback, onto the show today. We'll talk to him about, the differences for a team now, kind of shifting from a night game to a day game, how that impacts the Georgia players. Are they paying close attention? What's going on with the weather? We'll sort of address all of that with David Greene coming up here in just a moment. Before that, though, let me deal with a couple of the big topics that are at issue here, which is how things change, why this decision was made. Was it the right decision from UGA's perspective? We'll let you weigh in on a lot of that on the program here today. Before we go any farther, though, let me kind of show you what Georgia has said on this, the sort of official particulars, which will sort of answer the question about the TV situation and everything else. Here's the official statement coming out from Georgia not too long ago that the Saturday Georgia-Middle Tennessee State game has been moved from a 7:15 p.m. kick to a 12 noon kick in Sanford Stadium. The game is going to be televised on the ESPN News on TV, and it'll stream live on the ESPN app. So important point there. TV a little bit different now because of the fact that the noon television window for the most part was already full. Georgia instead now going to have to move over to ESPN News. So it will be a little bit harder for some Georgia fans to find. The other thing that kind of jumps out about the Georgia statement, we didn't have room on the screen to show you this, but the other thing that UGA says here, it's an extensive evaluation involving the uncertainty of weather conditions on the East Coast, the consideration of all constituencies involved, including fans, support staff, and law enforcement. So this kind of comes across as a sort of better safe than sorry decision from Georgia. And listen, the one thing that you're going to hear me say a lot on today's program is that these choices are really, really tough to make. If you're Greg McGarity, who's sort of the spearhead on this as the Georgia athletic director, this is not an easy choice to make because there is a penalty for Georgia to be paid by moving the game to a different time. Sanford Stadium is not going to be full on Saturday. It's just not. Think about it like someone like me who's got young children. When you've got a night game, then you plan something earlier in the day. I mean, listen, a lot of people who listen to this show tailgate from 6 a.m. till game time, no matter when game time is. But that's not the way that all Georgia fans treat Saturdays, depending on what kind of station of life that you're in. There are some people who have something planned in the afternoon and then heading over to Sanford Stadium at night. By moving the game to the afternoon, it now prohibits them from being there. Because if the game was going to be a noon type deal, busy families, things like that, they'd have something planned on Saturday night. They're just, not everybody in that sort of throng of 92,000 people can devote their entire college football Saturday to nothing but college football. You got other things to go on here. So Georgia does sacrifice something from moving the game from nighttime to noon. You do sacrifice a full stadium. It won't be full. Kirby Smart, from a recruiting standpoint, sacrifices some recruits who were going to use the night game as a way to get to Sanford Stadium. Depending on where you live, Athens for a noon kick after you've played a late night Friday night game can be a little bit of a difficult thing to get to here. So there'll probably be fewer recruits now at a noon start than there would have been for a 7:15 start. And for many of you right now who've listened to the sound of my voice and you hear about the game moving to ESPN News, you're sort of scrambling on your own sort of, TV package to find out, do you even have ESPN News? So there's something to be sacrificed here. And I think that one thing that around DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza that we're all going to say is if the weather for Georgia is going to be bad, if the weather, for Georgia, high winds, for instance, by Saturday night, if any of that's going to, to put Georgia fans in harm's way, then changing the game time is absolutely the right thing to do. And yet, if this is only being done as a way of saying, we're not sure what the weather's going to be like, so we're going to be better safe than sorry. At that point in time, I almost wonder if better safe than sorry is the best possible choice that Georgia could make here. Because I think over the course of time, and this is sort of steps out of the boundaries of just football, over the course of time, I think better safe than sorry actually makes people a little bit less safe. I was listening to WSB Radio, the big news radio station in Atlanta, driving into work today, and one of their lead stories on the news this morning was up and down the Carolina coast in South Carolina and North Carolina, places like that. They're having a hard time getting everyone to want to evacuate. They were interviewing people on the news this morning on the radio that are choosing not to leave South Carolina. And one of the people gave for why he's not choosing to leave his home is because the state of emergency is like 4 or 5 states wide. The guy was almost suggesting that he just simply doesn't believe that the emergency is going to be as bad as the government's trying to tell you that it is. And I think when you sort of operate on the better safe than sorry procedure over and over and over again, I do think at some point in time it sort of numbs people to what an actual emergency might be. Now, in Georgia's case, it's obviously way too early to know what the real situation with the weather is going to be. If you've got people in sort of a dangerous situation, obviously Georgia would be viewed as acting very prudently and swiftly by moving the game time up. But there is a trade-off here for moving the game. I think that's an important thing to think about. So we'll kind of weigh in on the comment section on this all day long. Let you give your thoughts about the game time change from 7:15 p.m. up to 12 noon and the impact that's going to have on you personally and whether this is really the right decision for Georgia to make. As we said before, this is one of those moments where I'm glad I'm not sitting in the big chair being forced to make a decision quite as tough as this. So a lot of impact on what's going to happen around Georgia. We'll talk to a former Georgia player about that right now, including how the players will respond to all this. In fact, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, let's welcome in David Greene right now. And he is a good friend to our program. He's the former Georgia quarterback. It's David Greene here. He joins us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. So, David, I'm thinking back over the course of your Georgia career. I can think of at least one game that was impacted by weather. The South Carolina game in 2002, there was the postponement. You had to leave the field and then come back on. I guess I'm having a hard time thinking of any other game that you played that was impacted by weather the way that the Georgia Middle Tennessee State game will be on Saturday. Is that it for you? Was it just that South Carolina game? Is that the only one?
Yeah, I mean, that's the only one this close to the game. Now, of course, it wasn't weather, but 9/11.
Sure.
That was one year. We were getting ready to play South Carolina, and then obviously that happened and, kind of postponed games across the country. But, yeah, I don't think, Brandon, as far as the player, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, these guys are used to doing it, and putting the helmet and shoulder pads on day in and day out, whether you play at 10 o'clock or midnight or whatever, as long as, coach says, hey, man, it's time to go out there and play, you just do it. So, so as far as the change taking place there, not as big of a deal, probably more of a distraction for the fans, figuring out, what are my travel plans, what time can I tailgate, but as far as the players, I don't think it's that big of a deal.
So that's kind of interesting. You mentioned the 2001 situation, a very different issue than this because it was 9/11, but the Houston game gets postponed that week, moved to the end of the season, played that game in December that year. And it sounds like you're saying that for the most part, players kind of block all that stuff out. Now, your game that year was actually postponed, whereas this is just a game time change. So it sounds like you don't think the player routine, the earlier pregame meal now, I guess maybe even earlier bedtime, maybe the more appropriate choice. You don't think too much of that's going to be impacted here for Georgia on Saturday?
No, not at all. Look, I mean, these guys are used to, having to do things on the fly and just, it's just football. So it's just, it's not like there's, too much preparation you got to do from as far as, hey, just get yourself ready to play. I mean, they know they're going to be playing Saturday. It's going to be playing at noon instead of it being a night game. So the morning schedule and routine certainly is going to be different. The guys are going to probably have to go to bed earlier because they're going to have to get up earlier. But at least they don't travel like it was when I was playing. We used to go to Lake Lanier. They talk about early mornings. I mean, we have to get really early for a noon game to travel all the way back to Athens and get ready. But no, player preparation and the whole deal. That's not going to be an issue one bit.
Monty Moon brings up a good point by making the announcement here on a Thursday as opposed to a Friday. It just gives us sort of one more day for both players, coaches, and fans to make their preparations. We'll talk to Georgia quarterback David Greene about some of that right now here on DawgNation Daily. And I guess let me take it back to football here for a moment. Last week, Georgia at South Carolina, dominant blowout win. What was your thoughts on what you saw from UGA? How impressed were you with the performance that Georgia put forth in its first SEC game of the season?
Well, Georgia, you could tell the team's playing with a lot of confidence. I think I mentioned after week one, I felt like when I was watching the game on TV, it was in fast forward a little bit.
Yeah.
And the good news is I still had the same feeling after week two with South Carolina. We just got a ton of speed. We got a lot more depth. We just got tremendous athletes across the field. And it's kind of nice, watching Fromm. He'll just grab the ball, throw it down the line to Hardman, and he just runs past everybody. And it's rare, in college football, especially in the SEC game of that magnitude, that a guy outruns the angle that the defender is taking. And I'm going, I mean, there's some special talent on this team. But I like the maturity as well, Brandon. That's the one thing I wanted to see coming this season. What the leadership going to be like? How are they going to handle big moments? And it didn't seem like even after that game, it wasn't like everybody, the players were going nuts like they won the Super Bowl. I think the guys felt like they would win, and I don't think they were surprised that they won it the way they did. It was very much a business-like approach by those guys.
Yeah, Dave, that's a really good point. We told the story earlier this week on our program that one of my producers and we were on the field. We were going to get some video of the celebration just because that kind of looks cool. It's sort of a cool video. People like that stuff. We were going to use that in the post-game show that we were doing. But on the field, there was no celebration whatsoever. Now, the team had a little fun with it when it got back to the locker room once all the post-game comments from the coaches had been made. But on the field, as you said, it was a prayer right there in the middle of the field, a pat on the back, and everybody just sort of walked back to the locker room very businesslike. And it is kind of amazing how quickly this new crop of leaders and kind of veteran players, replacing the Chubbs and Michelles and Roquans and Lorenzos of a year ago, how quickly they've sort of stepped into that sort of business mentality of, hey, we're on the road here for a business trip. We're going to get the win we came to get, and then we're going to head back home. It's kind of amazing how quickly this new team has sort of adopted the same mindset that seemed present with the old team.
Well, I think it starts with coach, and look at the culture shift that he's been able to bring to Georgia. Not only has he been able to recruit well, he's been able to change the mindset of the players. I'll never forget, kind of when I knew things were starting to get off track, during the Coach Rick era was when we beat, I believe, Georgia Southern in overtime, and our team celebrated like they had just won the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And you could tell the expectations were a lot higher in stands than they were on the field. And that's a problem. Yeah. And you look at what Coach has been able to bring in. There's a certain mentality and there's a certain way that he expects these guys to play, whether it's on Saturday, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday during the work week, and it doesn't matter who your opponent is. And that's what I've probably been most impressed with Kirby and the team. If you even go back to last year, I don't think there was a single game where Georgia didn't show up. We got smoked against Auburn, but Auburn was playing unbelievable football. They beat Alabama last year, and starting off this year, it's been the same way. I mean, there was no letdown against Austin Peay. They respected the opponent. They came out and played great football. So, those are what championship teams do. They come out, and anytime they step in between the lines, it's time to show up and play, and this team's certainly doing that.
Dave, I'll tell you something else that I noticed that was sort of impressive to me, and that's the poise that Jake Fromm's showing at quarterback. As you know, because you played the position, he's been the subject of a lot of chatter and attention during the offseason and thus far during the season because Georgia, like a few of these programs, kind of flirted with the idea of maybe playing two quarterbacks. Certainly the number 2 quarterback at Georgia, Justin Fields, has gotten a lot of attention, probably justifiably so. He looks like a really good talent. And yet, the poise that Fromm showed as the starting quarterback on Saturday, yes, he throws the first half interception. It probably wasn't maybe the best overall decision, but he bounces back, has a very efficient day. Georgia through the air was pretty dangerous against South Carolina, and Jake Fromm just has sort of kind of come through all of this, I think, very calmly, very coolly, and he really looks like a veteran quarterback now as opposed to the guy last year who was maybe better than expected as a freshman. All of a sudden now, Fromm looks like the kind of guy that's got a few snaps under his belt, and it's pretty nice to see, I have to say.
Yeah, no, I tell you what, he's a great competitor to start with. I mean, you just watch the way, he goes out there and handles his business. I haven't seen him one time since he's, been playing at Georgia where he's totally just melted down and didn't look like he was ready for the moment or the moment was too big for him. When you look at great competitors like him, he's ready. I mean, he's ready to step in there and play. It doesn't matter if it's Oklahoma or the national championship or it's Austin Peay. The guy loves football. He loves to compete. He's doing it at a very high level, and he's playing with a ton of confidence. I mean, look, one of the things you want out of your quarterback is you want consistency. And when you look at the great quarterbacks, whether it's college or pro or whatever, a lot of the greatest ones, a lot of times they're the greatest competitors as well, and they show up ready to go. Week in and week out, they don't have the yo-yo type games that a lot of quarterbacks do have, and I would certainly throw Jake into that mix at this point because week in and week out, he gives you his A game and he's ready to show up, play, and win.
In a couple minutes here, I want to ask you how the change of game time on Saturday is going to impact the pregame plans over at Tailgate Apparel. And by the way, if you haven't checked out Tailgate Apparel, 279 East Broad Street, right there in downtown Athens, it is the old Harry Bissett's building, one of the great spots to kind of find all your UGA apparel. If you want to look good during the Georgia games, Tailgate Apparel is the way to do that. And they've also been doing a great job of hosting these autograph signings pre-game every single Saturday, going back now for a while. Maybe a slight shift with the news on that. We'll hear that from David coming up in just a moment. Let me squeeze in one more question, David, before we get there. You kind of alluded to a McCole Hardman earlier, a guy that had a big day for Georgia on Saturday. As a quarterback yourself, obviously I think you probably enjoyed chemistry with a number of wide receivers. It seems like Jake Fromm here pretty quickly has developed a really nice chemistry with Hardman here this season. How does that happen? Last year, Fromm was probably a little bit more comfortable with Javon Wims. Wims was Georgia's leading receiver. He's gone now, and it seems like the security blanket for Fromm this year, at least thus far, kind of looks like it's going to be McCole. How does that chemistry between a quarterback and a wide receiver develop, and in the case of these two, maybe develop as quickly as it has?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, it certainly develops, in the off season. So I think the summertime, you get a good feel for, how he's running routes and the timing of the whole deal. But a lot of it, honestly, Brandon, is dictated on the defense, because there's times you want to, the coach calls a play wanting to go here, but if the defense takes it away, you got to go to the next spot. And so the one thing I think we're seeing is that Chaney's, he's designing a lot of plays to get the ball into Hardman's hands because we know how dangerous he is. And he's playing with so much confidence. There's nothing, more exciting when you can just throw the ball down the line and it goes, 30, 40 yards. I mean, that's the easiest way to, to score points. But, last year Wims was kind of our threat when in the passing game, he and Godwin. But this year you got Hardman out there. He's making plays, and there's going to be Godwin. There's a number of guys that can go the distance for us. And that's the thing that's making this team so dangerous is, you can't just key on one or two guys like you could in the past against Georgia. We got 5, 6, 7 guys that can take it to the house on any given play.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the guys that obviously did that for you back in your Georgia career was Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards. The initial plan was for Edwards to be the autograph signing guest of honor there at Tailgate Apparel before the game on Saturday. That was back when it was a night game for 7:15 p.m., the noon change. Do we know yet, David, how that's going to impact the plans there at Tailgate Apparel?
Well, the fans are actually they should be pretty excited about this. We're actually going to have Boss Bailey coming in from 9 to 11 on Saturdays, and Terrence is going to be there from 10 to 11. So they're actually going to overlap a little bit. So the Georgia fans actually get to tailgate, around 9:30, 10 o'clock or so. You're gonna have both Boss and Terrence there at the same time. Two great dogs, and obviously two of the most favorite dogs that have been around, and great guys as well. It'll be a treat for a lot of the dog fans.
So what an unbelievable announcement. We just doubled up the autograph guest there for Tailgate Apparel. We told you about Terrence Edwards last week. Terrence going to be there at 10 on Saturday, but Boss Bailey coming in at 9 a.m. on Saturday. If you're just joining us, either on the radio or on video, it is a noon kick now for Georgia, Middle Tennessee State, and Tailgate Apparel has responded to that quickly. Two big autograph signings, Boss Bailey and then Terrence Edwards. Boss there starting at 9 a.m., Terrence Edwards there starting at 10 a.m. 279 East Broad Street right there in Athens. It's the old Harry Bissett's building. Downtown, really cool game day type apparel, really good looking. I like sort of the retro feel to a lot of the tailgate stuff. It is sharp gear. David, thanks for letting us know about that. I know a lot of the people who are listening and watching right now will make their own plans to kind of now be in Athens a little earlier to take advantage of that. We appreciate your insight on the Georgia Bulldogs, and if you don't mind, we'll look forward to speaking to you here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, very soon.
Sounds good, Brandon. Thank you, buddy.
So good stuff there from David Greene. And how about that big announcement? Boss Bailey and Terrence Edwards signing autographs before the game at a Tailgate Apparel on Saturday. So that's going to be really exciting. Right there in downtown Athens is Tailgate Apparel, 279 East Broad Street. So really good stuff on that. All right, so if you're a podcast listener, you've been listening the whole time. But if you're a video watcher or a radio listener, you may have kind of jumped in here pretty quickly. Let me reset the information as we know it right now. Georgia announcing sometime around 9:30 this morning, sometime in the 9 o'clock hour, that it's changing its game time with Middle Tennessee State from the originally scheduled 7:15 p.m. to the noon kick now for Georgia and Middle Tennessee State. The game is now going to be televised on ESPN News. You can also watch it on the ESPN app. Georgia lets us know. So kind of a significant change there on that. And my opinion on this is that I'm just not quite sure this was the right decision. Based on the weather, as I understand it, and I thought that Brad Nitz, the WSB TV Channel 2 meteorologist, did a great job of sort of explaining exactly what the weather looks like for Georgia here. It sounds like if it gets bad in the state of Georgia, that doesn't happen until Sunday instead of Saturday, but Georgia choosing caution here over anything else. And if you're the person making the decision here, it's easy to understand why caution feels like the sort of the best step forward. But for me, better safe than sorry is not necessarily the best plan. I don't know that better safe than sorry ultimately makes the state of Georgia actually safer in this regard. And one of the things that people are going to point to is, well, hold on now, BA. The South Carolina game for Saturday at Williams-Brice Stadium was completely canceled. That's true, but there are a couple things that make the University of South Carolina, in this case, I think, different from the University of Georgia. First of all, I think that, based on the weather reports I've been hearing, the state of South Carolina is much more in the path of the storm than the state of Georgia is. Also, Columbia is essentially on the evacuation route. Right there was it I-26 that kind of comes from the South Carolina coast back inland. Charleston, about an hour away from Columbia. If you're leaving the South Carolina coast right there on I-26, you're going to drive right through Columbia. I don't think the same path is going to take as many people there into the city of Athens. I'm not telling you it's the wrong decision for Georgia to have made, but I think that better safe than sorry doesn't necessarily get you to where you want to go when it comes to some stuff like this, and I do think it's going to have an impact for Georgia on the field. I do think you'll see less people in the stands. I think you'll see less recruits at the game, and I frankly think you'll see less people who are able to find the game on television now at the earlier time on a bit more obscure cable television network. But I also know what it's like to be Greg McGarity, or certainly have an imagination of what it's like to be a Georgia official here, obviously weighing a lot of very, very tough factors. And so the decision that Georgia makes is to play the game there at noon. We'll talk more about this. Let me also get you up to date on everything else happening around college football here this weekend as we take a look at some of the big games around the SEC and who we think are going to win them with our MyBookie Best Bets.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff there from David Greene a moment ago, by the way, the former Georgia quarterback. He is such a great resource for us to have here on DawgNation Daily. He just knows what it's like to be on the team. He knows what it's like to be a quarterback and very much a similar role to what Jake Fromm's in for Georgia right now. And his insight on stuff like this and his ability to sort of tell the stories of his own career are really, really fun there. And what a great autograph signing that's going to be at a Tailgate Apparel coming up on Saturday. All right, let me transition before we get back to the Georgia stuff with the weather and do our SEC through here and do our MyBookie Best Bets with a look at some of the top games around the SEC here this upcoming Saturday and who I think is going to win these games. I'll give you my picks. Picks last week did not do quite as well as the first week. I was wrong on A&M and Clemson. I was right, though, on Florida, Kentucky, so I guess I'll take the win there in that regard. The point here is, though, is many of you are much better at this than I am, so if you are, you want to play where the pros play. Get your bets down at a place that's known for the fast, no-hassle payout when you do win. I'm talking about my friends at MyBookie. It's the only service that we'd recommend here around DawgNation Daily. And the reason why, as I said, because they offer that fast, no-hassle payout when you do win. And right now, if you find MyBookie online and use the promo code DawgNation, your first deposit can be matched dollar for dollar. So you're essentially already a winner before you even get the first bet in there. That's why we like MyBookie around here. So find MyBookie online. It's MyBookie. Find them online. Use the promo code DawgNation. You can get your first deposit match dollar for dollar. You play, you win, you get paid. It's the place where the pros play. Check out MyBookie online. With that said, let's do our MyBookie Best Bets here. I have a couple strong opinions on some of the games for this upcoming Saturday. Let me start with LSU and Auburn here, where at last check at MyBookie, Auburn was a 10-point favorite here on this. Auburn a 10-point favorite here when it comes to that with LSU on Saturday. I feel pretty strongly on the Auburn side of things here for a couple of reasons. I think there was a big overreaction to LSU with its win against Miami 2 Sundays ago. And we called that here during our MyBookie Best Bet segment. We thought that LSU was a more talented team than Miami. We thought LSU entered the season in somewhat underrated fashion. We expected LSU to beat Miami. That's exactly what happened. But in the aftermath of that, there was sort of a tendency, I think, to overrate LSU there at that point. Offense did not look good a week ago against a very inferior opponent, especially in the second half. Joe Burrow's completion percentage is just terrible right now, really in every single regard imaginable. As a 10-point favorite playing at home, this series has heavily favored the home teams now for a number of years. Auburn hasn't won at LSU since 1999. LSU hasn't been very good at late at Auburn. So I think Auburn covers this number in a big way. -10, not too much here. I think Auburn's a big winner there at home. I don't quite feel as strongly about Alabama at Ole Miss. I think for the most part, I would just sort of stay away from this game one way or another. I'm assuming that Alabama is a fairly easy winner. I think both these teams could score a lot of points. Ole Miss's offense is really good. The Alabama secondary may be the only weakness on that entire roster. So you could see a lot of points here. Ultimately, if I'm in some sort of pool where I have to pick the game, I'd probably take Alabama minus the 21.5 here. I probably don't go with the home team, even though they're getting a lot of points. But ultimately, this is not a game I feel all that strongly about. Alabama's an easy winner, but is it easy enough to cover the number? I'm not quite sure about that. How about Vanderbilt at Notre Dame? Now, this is another one of those games that I don't have a strong feeling about one way or another. Notre Dame looked pretty good week 1 at home against Michigan. I wouldn't imagine the Vanderbilt fans will be quite as good as taking over Notre Dame Stadium the way that Georgia was last September. I think overall, this is probably a Notre Dame win. If I had to guess, I would say it's a cover. I also put the wrong point spread here. It's not plus 13.5. It's Notre Dame minus 13.5. Let me correct myself on that. Notre Dame's the 2-touchdown favorite here. So I think they probably cover that 2-touchdown number against Vanderbilt if I had to guess. Vanderbilt is 2-0. I think it's a shaky 2-0. One of the teams they beat was Middle Tennessee State. That doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot to me. Vanderbilt may not be terrible. They're probably not the worst team in the SEC. That's probably Arkansas, but not good enough to keep it within 2 touchdowns on the road at Notre Dame if I had to guess. The next game is a game where my heart and my head feel very different here. Colorado State is at Florida. Florida is minus 20.5 at last check here. Now, this is also one of those games that started out only about minus 18 here, which is a dramatic overreaction to two things. Colorado State won at home last week against Arkansas. Florida lost at home to Kentucky. So there's clearly this, I think, tendency in the aftermath of that to overrate Colorado State, underrate Florida. Let's keep the entire perspective in mind here, though. Colorado State has not looked good the first 2 weeks of the season, blown out by Colorado, terrible against Hawaii in week 1. Florida is not a good team, but probably motivated coming off the embarrassing loss to Kentucky. My guess is, even though there's nothing I'd want to see in this universe more than Mike Bobo go into Gainesville and pull the upset against Florida, my guess is Florida covers the 3-touchdown spread here. They are, unfortunately for me, a my bookie best bet coming up here on this particular Saturday. And then the final game I'll get to here for the my bookie best bets, it's Georgia's opponent for next Saturday, Missouri at Purdue. Missouri a favorite on the road here against Purdue after Purdue just completely walloped Missouri a year ago. So that right there ought to tell you something. This is a little bit screwy of a situation. I just simply don't think Missouri's that good. I'm not allowing them to give points to anybody on the road right now. I'm going to take the Boilers here, plus the points as a slight home underdog here, about a touchdown home underdog. I'm going to go against Georgia's opponent next week, Missouri. I'll make the Boilermakers my bookie best bet, and we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, as promised, I want to give you guys a chance to sort of weigh in on what's happened with Georgia and the game time change. If you're just joining us on the radio or on video, it is noon now for Georgia, Saturday against Middle Tennessee State. It is ESPN News as the television network. Everything's going to shift and evolve here. Different time for the Dog Walk, obviously. Everything in terms of the DawgNation coverage will be different now. We'll give you updates on that over the course of the next couple of days, but it's a pretty big difference here to go from the night game to the noon game. You can sort of weigh in and give your thoughts on that. I think there are two things that probably ultimately impact this decision from a Georgia standpoint, and these are not insignificant considerations. I think that people think back to that SEC basketball tournament back in, I think it was 2008, although I don't 100% remember the year, where, had that game not gone into overtime, the one that Georgia ultimately won in the Georgia Dome that set up the scenario where Georgia wins the SEC tournament at Alexander Memorial Coliseum the following day, or the following the next 2 days. Had that game not gone into overtime, you would have had fans walking out of the Georgia Dome around the time that a tornado was hitting downtown Atlanta. Now, that could not have been predicted. That was very unpredictable, but the thought of fans spilling out of a sporting event as weather's getting bad is just really a horrifying thing, I think, for sports executives, administrators to think about here. And that's where the tendency to sort of go better safe than sorry can kind of creep in. Here's the other thing that kind of comes into this as well. For those of you that live in Georgia, you may remember the so-called snowpocalypse from a couple of years ago, where because snow came in sometime around noon, people were rushing home to get their kids because school was letting out early. It becomes this traffic catastrophe that could not be unsnarled for like 2 or 3 days. And ultimately, officials, politicians, state-level executives, they end up getting blamed for this. And nobody wants to be blamed for anything. So ultimately, decisions like this, moving Georgia from 7:15 to noon, are the kinds of things that are made in such a way to make sure that no one is in a position to get blamed for that. If I was in that same kind of position, I guess I would be tempted to sort of operate the same way. But when you look at ultimately what's happening here, I think those two events, I think, would almost have to kind of creep into the thinking for when the game time was changed. If this thing on Saturday, afternoon and evening is, sunny skies, no rain, no high wind, if any bad weather that comes to Georgia doesn't get here until Sunday, I think Georgia made a mistake by changing the game. And all you can do right now is go on the best information that's available by the forecast. And my understanding and reading the forecast suggests that Georgia was in a position that it could have played this game at 7:15. That's obviously my opinion. I'll give you a chance to weigh in on this. Greg Williams in the Facebook comment section says that he doesn't mind the noon kick for Georgia on Saturday. He says, get your business done, no injuries, and get home in time for some filet mignon. And maybe that's the way a lot of Georgia fans will sort of do this. And maybe that's the way the Georgia team will do this, knowing that it's got the road trip at Missouri next week. Maybe this is sort of a get in, get out, and get it kind of over type of thing. And who knows what Kirby Smart really thinks about all of this. It's the kind of thing where, maybe he does sort of like just sort of getting it over. Also in the Facebook comment section, Hellrail says, BA, I hate noon games. I know the majority of DawgNation does too. It's like the networks don't feel worth the primetime slots. This week's game I can tolerate, but we've been stuck at 12 noon for, the last few years. And so, for some Georgia fans, I mean, it is worth pointing out that if you are a big-time tailgater, if you love that great atmosphere, then there is something sort of lost by not sort of showcasing that on a nighttime game. Of course, if it's to avoid bad weather, then from everyone's standpoint, it's going to feel like a very good reason. But if the weather at Georgia ends up not being all that bad, it's almost going to look like too cautious of a decision. It's a tough situation to Monday morning quarterback, or in this case, I guess, Thursday morning quarterback. Georgia looked at the information it had available, and it made, I guess, what it thought was the best possible decision there. But for a lot of Georgia fans, this is going to end up being a disappointment. All right, we will get ready to wrap up here with our Gatorade countdown. We do it every single day on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And at some point in time, we're going to get to October the 27th. It's 44 days from now. Georgia plays Florida. We think they're going to beat the Gators again. It's our Gator countdown right here on a DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Let me also say this before we say goodbye to our radio and podcast audience and many of the folks who are watching on video here, that keep it close to DawgNation, the DawgNation app, the DawgNation on Facebook, the DawgNation video channels. As more information kind of comes out about how the game time change is going to impact everything else, we'll tell you about that. Dog walk now at a different time. Obviously, what does this do in terms of other things involving the game? We'll give you updates on all of that at DawgNation.com, including anything else that Georgia has to say in this regard. We'll see you at noon on Saturday, I guess, for Georgia Middle Tennessee State, and right back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily. Yeah, so I'd love to have y'all weigh in on your thoughts on kind of what you think about this. We'll have plenty more time for comments now on the situation here. Let me hit a few of these. Jonathan Alger brings up a good point, and I have to admit I did sort of think about this. Jonathan says the silver lining to all this is now you can watch the other good night games that are on while UGA is sort of off. That's true. By the time Georgia Middle Tennessee State finishes, you're going to roll right into Auburn and LSU at that point in time, and then Alabama Ole Miss at night. Also, you got TCU Ohio State on Saturday. What other big national game am I thinking about? I know TCU Ohio State's probably the biggest one there. Notre Dame Vanderbilt. Maybe. Connor says he thinks Vanderbilt's got a chance to win that game. So we'll add that one into the mix there. So not too bad. Chris Branham, by the way. I'm so glad he mentioned this. So our buddy Chris Branham, and with all the weather stuff, I've forgotten about this. Chris is actually getting married here this weekend. He's going to be out of the country watching the Georgia game. That's a big challenge there on that. But he's a huge dog fan. He's kind of checking in from all over the world here. So congratulations to Chris Branham getting ready to get married. Really appreciate that. We've actually here over the course of our time over the last few months had a chance to celebrate a couple of these weddings with some of our DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers. So congratulations to Chris, who's getting ready to get married here. Chris, thanks for popping up in the comment section. I was so fixated on the weather, I almost forgot about that. Alan Verbanchik says, BA, you're wrong. It's not about Athens weather. It's about the Middle Tennessee State fans driving back home to Tennessee into the storm at midnight Saturday night after a 7:30 game. Maybe that's the case, but, listen, I think there are a lot of considerations here, and I don't mind Georgia if it's thinking about this, its own situation. It needs to have, I would imagine, a pretty compelling reason to want to change the game time here. And if it's obvious this storm is right in the path of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where Tennessee's driving back to, then so be it. That becomes a good reason to change the game. But what makes that hard for me to understand and believe, though, is that the Virginia game got moved to Nashville. So, I mean, Murfreesboro is not that far from Nashville, is it? So, I mean, how bad could things be in Murfreesboro if the Virginia game got moved there? Miriam Martin Corbin says the safety of everyone is more important than the start time. It's not a conference game. Totally agree with Miriam on that. Safety is incredibly important here. But over the course of time, if everything's a state of emergency, then nothing's a state of emergency. If all 159 counties in Georgia are state of emergency, then at a certain point in time, the phrase state of emergency doesn't mean anything anymore. Even if that's sort of just done for potential federal funds from FEMA and things of that nature, there is still a public messaging price to be paid. And I think you see examples of that in South Carolina and North Carolina right now, where they can't get everybody to evacuate because a lot of people just don't believe the storm's coming. When messages like this are broadcast and then it ends up not being that, people are just sort of, I think, potentially numb to it all. Chip Gromlich says the Virginia game was moved 2 days ago based on the old track of the storm, which is another reason why, for me, better safe than sorry is not always the right track here, because you end up making a huge logistical change in the case of Virginia here that turns out not to have been necessary. Angie Mills says we're going to keep chopping. Kirby Smart doesn't care what time it all is. Go Dogs. I agree with Angie on that. I think ultimately stuff like this, from a football standpoint, unless we are still a football show, we're going to think some about football here. From a football standpoint, I think you do trust Kirby Smart's ability to sort of maintain his team's focus, going from what was a later start time to an earlier start time. My guess is Georgia's not going to feel the effects of that whatsoever. David Greene, I thought, had some really good thoughts on that. It just ends up being sort of an inconvenience for Georgia fans. Michael Roberts says moving the game helps us get ready for the game next week against Missouri. Maybe that ends up being true. If so, that's good news. Justin Sisk says if they don't take action, someone gets hurt or people get into a bad situation, it's going to fall back on Georgia. And Justin, ultimately, I think that's why, the decision's made the way that it is. But, let's not act like, there's no trade-off for the other side of this here as well. By the way, the other thing that Georgia mentions in its statement we should point out as well is Georgia encourages folks to donate to the Red Cross here, and that is a really, really good thing. Everybody should certainly consider doing that. Al Clemens says would not be all that bad if the game was canceled. We'd have all our players ready for Missouri. So obviously a lot of folks were thinking how this could impact the Georgia road trip next week. 98 Sports Talk says, who do you think wins the LSU-Auburn game? As I said before, I really like Auburn a lot. I really like Auburn a lot on Saturday. Not in general, but in this game. Stacy Goebel says on YouTube, all the changes that are being made to the start time irrelevant to the outcome of the game. Therefore, we'll have pretty much wasted an episode of DawgNation Daily talking about a whole lot of nothing. Stacy, this is one of those things where even if it doesn't change the outcome, I mean, the viewing experience for a lot of the people who are listening and watching the show right now is greatly impacted by this. People want to find out where they can watch it on television. People want to find out, for those who did plan on going to the game, that they want to find out about that. So, there are a lot of sort of personal impacts here, even if it's even it doesn't ultimately impact the outcome of the game itself. Al Clemens says the time, though, doesn't make any difference to me. At least I know I'll be awake to watch the fourth quarter. It's going to be boring for sure. So I guess Al's not expecting too much from Middle Tennessee State here one way or another. Enrique Murillo says everybody's going to be watching Auburn LSU this week and then Florida Tennessee next week. Yeah, I'll admit, even if it's for sort of like car crash reasons. I'm pretty compelled by that Florida-Tennessee game next week for sure. Pretty compelled by that for sure. Stacey Goebel also reminding us that it'll be 2 consecutive weeks for Georgia playing at noon, although next week will be 11 a.m. local time. J.W. Schwartz, kind of an interesting opinion on YouTube, kind of goes against the conventional wisdom of the home team. He likes LSU by at least 4 on Saturday. That's pretty interesting. Let me hit a couple of the Facebook comments again there as well. Joseph Trout asking what the game time has changed to. Joseph, it's now a noon start for Georgia on Saturday against Middle Tennessee. Jay Wise says he likes it better this way. We get our early afternoon nap in. Well, that's what really matters. Jamie Kennedy says it's extra time to prepare for Missouri. Chris Branham says on the eve or very close to the eve of his wedding that he hopes LSU smacks Auburn so Jaden Hazelwood will stop thinking about Auburn. I guess that's one way to think about that. Richard Smith says which freshmen are going to get a chance this weekend? I think you're going to see, obviously, plenty more of those guys the way we've been kind of seeing them sprinkled in. We've seen some of Channing Tindall. We see more of that. We've seen a lot of Adam Anderson, people like that on special teams. I look forward to seeing, more from those, whether it be that crop of freshmen inside linebackers, crop of freshmen outside linebackers. I look forward to seeing more from them. Of course, in a big role there, Cade Mays probably continuing there in his role as there at left tackle. Good stuff from Richard there. Marshall Fleming says the chance of bad weather is better at noon than 7:30. Only 10% chance of rain. Whoever changed start time, Marshall's upset about that in that regard. And so Marshall, obviously I have my opinion on this, and I want to be fair to say that it is, I think, a tough call on a complicated situation because there are a lot of other factors, including like emergency personnel, state patrol officers, things like that, who might be used at the Georgia coast. But based on my understanding of the weather, there's not going to be anything to do with the Georgia coast on Saturday at 7:30. But I'm also not a meteorologist. So yeah, still a lot of confusion in the comment section about what exactly is happening. Noon on Saturday, the new start time. ESPN News, the new television network there. So people still kind of weighing in on that. Somebody also mentioned McCole Hardman in the comment section there as well. Who was that? Yeah, Jay Wise mentioning Hardman. I loved what David Greene had to say about McCole Hardman a moment ago and the way in which the chemistry between a quarterback and a wide receiver is developed. And, David says a lot of this kind of stuff comes in the off season. And you know how it works. I mean, or at least we're becoming more aware of this kind of stuff. Official practices aren't allowed to take place. That's a time in which coaches can have a lot of interaction with the players themselves, but they can sort of form their own sort of unofficial workouts. This is something we've always been led to believe that Jake Fromm is very good at. And it's in that moment really where Fromm and his receivers sort of develop that chemistry. And whatever work that McCole and Fromm were doing together during the summer, you see a lot of examples of how that's already working very well here this year. And that's kind of a really nice thing to see. Let me get a few more comments. Christoph Himmelsbach brings up an interesting point. He says, to those saying, why not just cancel it? This is still a much-needed scrimmage for Georgia to prepare for the rest of the season. So I sort of agree with Christoph on that. And I have to admit, around here we say with the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, I do think about more stuff other than just, is Georgia going to win or not? I mean, I have to admit, I do think about the experience of being a fan here. And you don't get that many of these trips to Sanford Stadium, or for those of you who watch the game on television, you don't get that many opportunities to sort of sit in front of a couch, hang out with friends, and watch the game. So for the people who are like, the only thing that matters is the bottom line, Georgia's still going to win no matter what. I mean, for me, there are other considerations beyond that. There just sort of are. And, if you want to think about the football part of this, it's a chance for Georgia to get some more freshman experience, to get some more reps for Jake Fromm and, the receivers that he's going to. We can see that pecking order sort of establish itself a bit more before the SEC play kind of takes over for the balance of the rest of the season beyond this. And it's just the experience of having a game to talk about. I mean, think about, back around the middle of August, how much we would have, at that point in time, we'd paid anything to see Georgia play Middle Tennessee State, even if it was just Middle Tennessee State. So I'm not that excited about the game in general, but I'm not so unexcited about it that I don't care if it's played or not. I still want a chance to sort of enjoy this as an entertainment option. Faith Hensley says, I'd rather see the game earlier than later for the better of the players, not to get stuck in bad weather. And Faith, there's no one who would disagree with that whatsoever. Just the best I can tell, there is no bad weather. So, Faith, I think that's certainly a very fair point. Jordan Wansley asked about Zamir White, any update on Zeus? So Kirby actually talked about him the other day for a brief minute, that he had his surgery right there, within the week of him, getting the injury. You have to wait for the swelling to die down, and then he has the surgery sort of right away there within the next few days. And it sounds like the recovery on that is going really well. So the surgery has taken place. It's over and done with. And the best I can tell, based on what Kirby said the other day, it seems like that's kind of going pretty well. Chris Branham also says that I think this game lends itself to seeing some more fields in the passing game. I wouldn't mind seeing some of that just from a curiosity standpoint. Marcus Bass says, BA, you realize LSU and Auburn's going to be a great game, but Dogs have to face both those teams. That's going to be a tough task. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to watch that game from the perspective of, on paper, the two toughest games that Georgia is slated to play are the two opponents that are playing Saturday at 3:30. So if you get a chance to watch that either at your tailgate post game or at your house after the Georgia game is done, that's a pretty good thing there. Adam Hicks says, why don't we ever talk about Jamari Salyer? He's quite literally a huge talent in every sense of the word. So, Adam, part of this is, and there was some reports this week that Salyer was actually working a little bit at tackle during practice. So I think what's happened for Salyer thus far, if I could just sort of pontificate, sort of guess out loud on, he's practiced thus far at so many different positions, which is part of what Georgia does. It likes to cross-train its offensive linemen, that he hasn't really had a chance to sort of settle into that position that he could play at right away yet. I think that Cade Mays, given the fact that he was at Georgia going back to January, gave him the early advantage on getting playing time. Trey Hill may be slightly in the same situation. He was a spring enrollee. That gives him a slight advantage there over Salyer. So I think you have some of that going on with Jamari there. So I think eventually this season, Jamari's going to be a player and a guy that's on the field a good bit for Georgia. But just given the fact that he was a summer enrollee, given the fact that he's done some cross-training here thus far in August and in September, I just think he may be a step behind Mays and maybe even Hill in terms of getting on the field. But I agree with your overall premise that eventually here in this freshman season, I think Salyer's going to be heard from. I think at some point in time, Salyer's going to be a big-time starter for Georgia. Adam Hart Palmer doesn't like the decision. Oh, no, he actually doesn't agree with me that it should be seen as a bad decision. There's zero reason why this should be seen as a bad decision, zero. I'm not saying it's a bad decision. All I'm simply saying is that better safe than sorry is not always the best decision. Santiago Diarn says, I think Fromm adjusts to D-Rob. He'll throw to him soon. You can bank on that. Good stuff from Santiago. Thank you for the kind words, Philip Carroll. I really appreciate that. That's very nice of you. Philip Jordan Wells says, folks, just tailgate at home if 12 is a bad time for you to go to Athens. So this is one of those situations where different people are just sort of at different stages of life. When I was younger, back before I sort of worked, in the sports media business, like my whole day was Georgia football. I mean, I'd get to Athens at 6:30 in the morning, and if Georgia played at 3:30, I'd tailgate to 3:30. But if they played at 7 p.m., I'd tailgate till 7 p.m. But I'm still getting there at 6:30. I mean, for a lot of people, there's this thing of the day belongs to Georgia football, and it's from the time the sun comes up till well beyond the time the sun goes down. But when you get to be kind of an old man like me, it just becomes a lot harder to do that. And for people who are even a little older than me, or their kids are a little older, it becomes even harder as well. I mean, there are a lot of people who view a Saturday like the one we're about to have as a time where I can go to my kids' sort of like, rec league game at noon, and depending on where you live, Atlanta area or somewhere around Athens, I can still get into Athens for the game time at 7 p.m. And that's not as much fun as some of y'all have on college football Saturdays, but that's a pretty good deal for a lot of people, that they can actually still go to the Georgia game while also enjoying their kids playing the rec league sport. So you're going to have, if I had to guess, you're going to have 10 or 15,000 empty seats on Saturday, if I had to guess. Brian Kephart critical of me for not spending enough time on YouTube. He says, I guess the 4 minutes on YouTube was painful for BA. Now, listen, I love the YouTube audience. Hinton Weston, speaking of YouTube, on YouTube says, at what point do we acknowledge that Richard LeCounte's going to be a superstar? I certainly think he looks the part right now, Hinton. I hope to continue to see that for him. Really interesting stuff. Stacey Goebel says, BA, the media makes everything a crisis, and they have talked us into wasting an episode of DawgNation. Now, come on, Stacey. The announcement was just made 20 minutes before we came on the air. And we also talked to David about other things besides just the weather, too, when David Greene was on. We tried to strike the right balance. I'm sorry if you thought we talked too much weather. Kevin Blackman says, scroll up. What did I miss, Kevin? Donnie Wilkerson says, yes, BA, it's all day. Bulldog football doesn't matter the time or who we play. For those of you that still get a chance to do that, here's my only advice as an old man. For those of you that get to just get to Athens before the sun comes up and stay there until last call on Saturday night, if you're still in that stage of your life, enjoy every minute of it. That's all. That's the only advice I'll give you as Grandpa BA here. Just enjoy every minute of that, because that stage of life does not last forever. It just doesn't. So for those of you that it doesn't matter what time the game starts, you're going to be rocking and rolling no matter what, both at home in front of your TV or there in Athens. Just really appreciate that and enjoy that stage of life. K9 Blues also says that Tyson Campbell will have a bounce-back game this week, as South Carolina was a phenomenal experience for him. I, for the most part, completely agree with K9 on that. Ron Armistead says, what TV network? Enrique Murillo gives the correct answer. It is ESPN News. If you gave me 20 minutes and $20, I could not find ESPN News on my TV right now, but I'm pretty sure I have it. Brian Kephart says, just messing with the BA. Does DawgNation know we're going to be pre- and post-game? So we'll be there around the dog walk pre-game on Saturday, and then after the game, back at our home away from home at the UGA bookstore. So this actually works out better, I guess, for the UGA bookstore in terms of that post-game crowd kind of falling through there. So we'll see immediately after the game up on the second floor at the UGA bookstore. Good stuff on that. Hinton Weston also mentioning Brenton Cox and Robert Beal. I thought it was interesting that Beal traveled last week and did play for Georgia. Maybe at a certain point we get to see more of him. Artistic Animals says it's channel 207 on DirecTV. That certainly makes that pretty easy. Let me hit a couple more and we'll get ready to get out of here. Charles Felder asking an interesting question about Tommy Bush. When will we get to see him? Yeah, right now that wide receiver course is crowded, man. A guy who played last year, Trey Blunt's having a hard time finding his spot on the field. We did see J.J. Holloman get his catch last week. A lot of us have been looking to see that. People are still asking when Demetrius Robertson's going to get some catches and get some action here. There are a lot of receivers battling for some spots right now, and I guess Tommy Bush is kind of in that mix there a bit as well, but I know he's a big fan favorite. Brad McGuire with a great comment to kind of close this out. He says, go Dogs, everybody be safe. And I know people are listening to us right now and watching us right now, not just in the state of Georgia, but all around the Southeast and all around the world. So wherever you are over the next few days, I hope that you stay safe and that you do find shelter if needed. And certainly we'll be here for you on a DawgNation Daily. And don't forget about the folks who do find themselves in harm's way, American Red Cross and other disaster relief organizations that can help take care of that. I'm sure they would appreciate your support if you can find a way to do that. And of course, we'll see you tomorrow morning back here at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day.